blessings in wealth, certainly, if we use it properly, but they can be a curse in the sense of, who's going to be kidnapped and held for ransom? Is it going to be the poor man or the very wealthy? And to ask that question is to answer it. Now, next verse in our list here is Proverbs 13, verse 11. Again, New King James there on the left column, ESV on the right. I'll read from the King James Version. Wealth gotten by vanity shall be diminished, but he that gathereth by labor shall increase. I really like the way the ESV words this. Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. Now, as we often say, Proverbs a lot of times will address things in generalisms or generalizations. So could it ever be the case that somebody is given a large sum of money? Or maybe it might even be that perhaps you have a relative, perhaps it's parents, and they have saved up, and when both parents pass away, you receive an inheritance. Is there something wrong with that? No, that's not what the verse is saying, but it's saying be careful about that. And we might even say, this, by the way, we covered this verse in our section on work. But we might say, easy come, easy go. Kind of a cautionary tale here against get-rich-quick schemes. They're high risk, and even if they work, one of the things he's saying is it's not appreciated like hard-earned wealth. And that's why so often you see somebody who wins a large sum of money. It could be some kind of settlement. It could be some kind of lottery winner. So often you see that in a very short period of time, they're broke. They've blown it. It's just not appreciated like money that is hard-earned. So the wise use of money and or little by little gathering, it tends to increase our appreciation, and it tends to help us to use more wisdom in how we handle it, just generally speaking. So that seems to be the idea here. All right, anything else on that one? Let's go to 18, same chapter here. Poverty and shame shall be to him that refuseth instruction, but he that regardeth reproof shall be honored. The idea here is that both poverty and shame are going to come to the one who refuses advice, and that's opposed to honor coming to the person who listens. Are you a person that listens to advice, or are you a person that, well, I don't need any advice? Kind of, we sometimes use the expression know-it-all. That happens sometimes where somebody gets to that thinking they don't need any instruction. They don't need any advice. The wise man is saying here, by inspiration, it's a good way to end up broke. Because, there might be somebody, there undoubtedly is someone who knows more about this than you do. Maybe it's some kind of money-making, might be market, it might be something else, but there's somebody that knows more, and you could end up losing a lot of money if you're not listening to good advice, solid advice. You might end up being ashamed, and there are a number of ways that could come. One of the obvious ones being you sit there and tell people, well, I know what I'm doing. Hey, just butt out, man. I got this. I know what I'm doing. And then you end up in that poverty. Well, now you're also shamed because you look like a fool when you sit there and say, hey, I don't need your advice. Leave me alone. I got this. And then you end up broke. So it kind of carries the idea there of both. But here's the interesting thing to me. He says, poverty and shame shall be to him that refuseth instruction. That's kind of what we were just talking about. But he that regardeth reproof shall be honored. So this second phrase seems to tie the same idea to hearing versus refusing discipline, reproof. It may be that, and this is one of those, we've studied this before in the context of growing as a Christian. becoming mature as a child of God. And one of the key signs of maturity, I mean, just emotional maturity, period, but especially in the spiritual context, is how do I handle a rebuke or a reproof? And the difference there being one's just a rebuke is a little bit more severe. It might be more, it might be a different tone. It might be a little bit severe, more severe consequences or just a more severe action. That's, you get the idea there. I think about reproof and rebuke. It's kind of like when mom says, if you do that again, you're going to be in trouble. That's kind of a reproof. But then you do it again and the hammer drops, that's the rebuke. That's kind of how I think of that sometimes. But reproof is just a milder form. How do I handle that? And sometimes you'll see somebody that might otherwise seem to be pretty mature. You say, hey, here's something that happened, and that wasn't the best way to handle that, or you really shouldn't have done that, you really shouldn't have said that. And, sometimes even the person giving the rebuke or the reproof, they could be mistaken. And I've seen times where they were. But instead of saying, well, now hold on, let's talk about this, the person who was being reproved or rebuked just blew. They blew a gasket or got very smug and arrogant. But same idea like we were talking about here with more in a general context in the first phrase of this verse. Second phrase seems to be in the context of reproof, discipline, correction. How do I handle that? And you want to see a sign of somebody who's matured, period, but especially in the Lord. How do we handle that if somebody approaches and says, whether they're right or wrong, regardless? If they're right, can I handle it? Am I big enough to take that correction and say, okay, you know what, you're right. I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have handled it that way. Or even if they're wrong, am I big enough to say, well, now, brother, I disagree with you. Sister, I think you're mistaken about this, but let's talk about it. Because I'm human. I could be wrong, same as anybody else. Let's talk about it. And let's figure this thing out. As opposed to just shutting somebody down or, again, kind of blowing up. We sometimes say, though, when will he ever learn? When will she ever learn? And, of course, sometimes, if we have wisdom, sometimes we need to say, when will I ever learn? And look in the mirror of God's Word and say, when am I going to learn this lesson? How many times do I have to hear, see the same thing before I get it through my head, before I start to listen? And so that, again, all that kind of idea here, and it seems like the second phrase there of the verse really ties that to the correction, the reproof, the rebuke, and so on. One more in chapter 13. Anything else on that one? Sometimes some of these verses, that was one that to me, I just was like, wow, there's a lot in that one little verse. Okay, verse 22 of chapter 13. A good man leaveth an inheritance to his children's children, and the wealth of the sinner is laid up for the just. Well, the blessing of God will rest on those who please him. And, here are the idea of the good man leaving an inheritance to his children's children. The idea of he's looking out for his family. He's going to make sure they're provided for. And it just now came to me, and I don't know why I didn't think of this before when I was doing my notes, but there's a verse in 2 Corinthians, I believe it's 12. Let me double check myself here. Yes, 12:14 of 2 Corinthians, where Paul says, behold, the third time I am ready to come to you, and I will not be burdensome to you, for I seek not yours, but you. And he says, for the children ought not to lay up for the parents, but the parents for the children. he says, now, of course, we understand that as parents get older, then roles will reverse somewhat. And sometimes we find ourselves in need of helping to care for our parents. But he's stating a general principle there. When you have children, especially small children that are living at home, you don't come in from work and say, what's for dinner? Are you preparing dinner? Are you going to pick us up something? Hey, did you pay the light bill? That's not how that works. The parents are laying up for the children. The parents are taking care of the children. And so he's stating it. Of course, it's a different context there, and it's been for 2 Corinthians 12. But he's stating a principle. Parents lay up for the children, and that's kind of inherent here in 13:22 of Proverbs. But also it's this idea of the wicked, whether it's a lack of progeny, may not have offspring, or it may just simply be because of his own foolishness. He's going to forfeit what he does have. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. But the wealth of the sinner, or the sinner's wealth, the ESV says, is laid up for the righteous. Sometimes things have a way of evening out, don't they? Matthew 5, verse 5, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. So a lot of times things have a way of evening out. And again, Proverbs speaks in generalization, so it's not saying that's always going to be the case, because there are exceptions to these truisms, and we've noticed that all along the way. But generally speaking, the good man, he's going to leave an inheritance for his children, for his children's children, and so on. But the wicked, his wealth is going to be laid up for the just. At some point, that's taken from him, whether providentially in our time, or sometimes you see that very literally, directly happening from God in ancient times. It's taken from him, and God will bless those who are good, righteous, faithful people. All right, anything else before we go to chapter 14? Yes, sir.
I have a note in my Bible that the inheritance is more than just money. It could be teaching, wisdom, example, that a man teaches his children and also is a good example for his grandchildren.
Yeah, that's Chris made the point that he's got a note in his Bible. The inheritance there is more than just money, and that is a very good point. It may be a good name. I was trying to remember who. I saw somebody said this recently. They were talking about things that they remembered from a parent or a grandparent maybe. But one of the things was, hey, we've left you, we haven't had a whole lot, but we have left you with a good name. And when we're gone from this earth, the parents were saying, we'll leave you with a good name, because we're going to follow the Lord, we're going to do what's right, and we'll leave you with that. But you do your part and guard that. You pass that on to your children, and then make sure they pass it on to theirs, and so forth. But that's an inheritance. It's not money, but it's no less of an inheritance. All kinds of ways that factors in. What about an inheritance of faith? Now, we understand we got to have our own convictions. It can't be, I'm not going to ride mom and dad's coattails or anybody else's coattails into heaven. I've got to have my own faith, my own convictions. But is that not an inheritance that we can leave for our children? It's a fool who says, well, they got to have their own convictions, so I'm just going to let them work it out. Well, that would be the very epitome of the foolish person that we've seen so many times throughout the book of Proverbs and elsewhere in the Bible. We've got to teach them and train them, and that's, fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And so what's the psalm? Is it 127? Arrows in the hands of a mighty man? Yes, 127. And he says, they're like arrows in the hands of a mighty warrior. But where does an arrow go when you shoot it? It goes where it's aimed, right? If your target is over here and you somehow get aimed over here, whether it be distraction or you get jostled or whatever it might be, it's going to end up going way off target. And so we're to aim those children toward heaven, toward faith in God. Yes, when the time comes, all things equal, there will come a time when they are going to have to take flight on their own. But which direction they fly, which direction they go, depends so heavily on where they are aimed during those formative years. So, yeah, the inheritance is definitely way more than just money. Yes, sir.
While back read a book, it was talking about business succession and small businesses is what I was speaking of. And the first generation, the person that starts a business has a passion and a dream, he does well typically. The second generation witness that passion and may not be their dream though, so usually don't do as well. Third generation may not have either one, so that's usually when they usually fail a lot of times. And it's true in our faith too. We've got to not only talk about the things that we leave our children and our grandchildren, we have to leave that passion with that dream that got it all started in the first generation, whether it be our faith or our business or whatever. Sometimes we fail to do that. We want to share the excitement of our faith, and sometimes by the second or third or fourth generation, it's run the course.
Yeah, I've read stuff like that before as well, relative to business or other things as well. But it's so true. Jimmy was talking about reading something, especially dealing with small business, and how like the one that starts the business, begins it. I mean, it's his or her blood, sweat, and tears, so to speak. And I mean, they have a passion for it, and especially if you can get over that hump and make it successful, make it profitable, and it's like, wow, okay, and man, it's just, there is a sense of accomplishment, and there is a passion, a just zeal and enthusiasm for that. And then there's a second generation, and they might have some of that enthusiasm and passion, but it's different because they haven't fought the battles. They haven't been at that point where sometimes you're up at night wondering how we're going to get this paid, how we're going to survive at this point. And so there's some things you just kind of sort of take for granted, and the passion wanes a little bit, and a lot of times by the third generation, and just like with Proverbs, there are exceptions to this, and you see some businesses, small businesses, even some bigger businesses, that they go for many generations. But a lot of times, by that third generation, it's just kind of like, and sometimes you'll even have a kid that's like, hey, I don't want your life. I don't want this. I don't want to do this. That's just not what I want to do. And so when it comes to businesses, the family business or something like that, well, that's really neither here nor there. You know, somebody may not be that into whatever the family business is, and that's okay. That may be disappointing at times to a parent. But my point being, when it comes to spirituality, that's just not an option. That's something that if we're going to go to heaven, we've got to follow in those footsteps if the parents indeed are faithful to the Lord. And so we've got to, and Jimmy's point being, we've got to instill or at least do our very best to instill the passion in our children for serving God. And to me, bringing up children and still bringing up children, I see it in my own family. I see it in other families, having worked with churches now for 25 plus years, that so much of that depends on us as parents. And what are we at home versus what we are at the church building during worship, during Bible class, and so on. Because even the youngest of children, our children may not know beans about the Bible, but one thing they'll recognize and see just as quickly as anything is hypocrisy. And if I don't care, if I'm just there because I don't want people on my back, or if it's just a social thing to me, and then I go home and it's, they see that. And man, nothing, I'm convinced few things at least, I'll say that. can equal or surpass that damage that is done. But we want to instill where we're pointing them toward heaven, and also to make them understand. I've told y'all before, one of the greatest things for me as an individual, I grew up with Christian parents, and so I am that third generation as far as Christianity. My dad's parents were Christians. My parents were Christians. I'm trying to remember if my dad's grandparents were Christians, but I'm thinking they were not. But anyways, and so I was brought up that way. But I'll be the first to tell you, throughout most of my childhood, I completely took that for granted. I did not have that passion. I did not have that enthusiasm. And quite frankly, one of the things that, in my mind, I don't know if, or at least how often I came out and said it. I'm pretty sure I did come out and say it once or twice, at least. I thought it was kind of boring to be a Christian. And I still say to this day, one of the biggest differences in my life to changing that was being around Cliff Goodwin and Tracy Moore. They both were guys that had worked with our youth. I ended up, the first church work I ever did was with Tracy. He had gone down to Ironiton, where Cliff is now, and he was preaching there. And they were looking for somebody to come do some summer youth work. So I'd ride around with Tracy. We'd make visits. We'd cut up. Cliff and I would go do things, and we'd cut up, and we'd have a good time. And it's like, all of a sudden, I kind of go, this is fun. I'm having fun. And then I ended up going to preaching school. And one of the most hilarious people I've ever met in my life, a very just humble, soft-spoken man, but Garland Elkins. I mean, hilarious. And he had so much fun. And Billy Bland, still one of the wittiest people I have ever known. And some of the things that he could say, you could never get one over on him. And sometimes even the instructors kind of jabbing at each other, having some fun. And I just, over and over again, I'm seeing, the more I was around actual faithful Christians, I'm seeing that this is not boring. This is fun. Fun without the regrets. Fun without the stupid penalties that you pay for your stupid, what do people say now? You play stupid games and you win stupid prizes. It was fun without the stupid prizes that you win for playing stupid games. And it made such a difference for me. And yeah, man, Jimmy's point is well made there. We got to instill not just the facts, but the passion for the Lord and serving the Lord in our children, because you can put the facts there, but if they're not on fire for it, they don't have some kind of interest in it, then something has to change. And I'm thankful that God put men like that in my path. That sometimes I just stop and think, wow, where would I have been without that? And it makes a difference. But great thoughts here, Brother Jimmy. I appreciate that. Anything else on that one? Yes. Yeah. And it is. Sometimes there's just not an interest there for whatever reason. Somebody maybe says, hey. Right. Yeah. And I mean, I've tried my best to tell my kids from time to time man, I don't care. I don't care what you do, for your work. Don't feel pressured to become a preacher. I'll be proud of you if you decide to be a preacher. But if you decide you want to go, Levi, don't listen to this too much now. But I'd say you may want to go if you're working at McDonald's or if you're cleaning out the sewer. I don't care. Just do the very best you can at it, for one thing. But serve God and be fired up and faithful, fired up for and faithful to the Lord Jesus Christ, because that, at the end of the day, is all that matters. And, obviously, I want them doing something where they can provide for their families. But the point being, that stuff doesn't matter. But we got to instill in our kids, no matter what, nothing matters. I mean, Matthew 16:26. What is a man profited if he should gain the whole world and lose his own soul? What shall a man give in exchange for his soul? I tell my kids that sometimes too, talking about, we're a sports crazed society and we all love it, and as parents we love it. We love to watch our kids play, and I think about that sometimes, and I've tried to remind them throughout the years of that as well. I love the sports, but and sometimes I remember at one point earlier on we'd say, it's not like you're going to go pro, and I still think that. I mean, we've talked before about the ridiculous odds of going pro, but I don't even say that anymore. I say, you know what? Well, let's just assume even that you could go pro. I don't want you to go pro, because that's going to be such a detriment to spirituality. I would rather see you just have something that you enjoy, but you're keeping God first. Even if you decided to go pro, though, whatever, make sure God comes first. That is the number one thing, and that's what takes priority in your life. And if we can get that into our kids' heads, and like Jimmy's talking about, get it with the passion and the enthusiasm for that, where this is not, well, I don't want to dishonor mom and dad. I don't want to dishonor their legacy, but no. I want them to say, this is me. This is who I am. I'm a Christian. And mom and dad were too, and I'm thankful for that. But this ain't about mom and dad. This is about me and my God. Or maybe even mom and dad weren't, but they chose their way, and I can't do anything about that. But I'm going to do what's right for me, because this is between me and my God. That is the most important thing. So, man, you can't emphasize it enough. Good thoughts there. Anything else on that one? All right, 13. No, that was the last one in 13. 14. Chapter 14, that is. Verse 20. Uh-oh. I may have lost internet again. Yeah, we have to get out our analog Bibles. Yeah, and it may come back. Do what? Yeah, the ESV is an offline Bible and the Blue Letter Bible app, but New King James is not. So I probably shouldn't have done that. All right, well, I'll just read it from the King James Version. If you got a different version, look at it, and hopefully this will come up shortly. The poor, this is chapter 14, verse 20. The poor is hated even of his own neighbor, but the rich hath many friends. This is another one of those. We noticed this last week, and I was thinking about this last week, like, okay, did we not have any of these before? I feel certain we did. One of these days I'd like to go through Proverbs and try to pick out all the ones that are more or less a statement of fact. We talked about that last week, you may recall, where some of these Proverbs, they're not stating the way things should be. It's saying, generally, again, generalization, generally this is the way it is. And it's not saying that's a good thing necessarily, it's just saying that's what it is. We sometimes have the expression, it is what it is. And this is one of those, 14:20. The poor is hated even of his own neighbor, but the rich man or the rich hath many friends. Well, the sad reality is that people are far more zealous to befriend a wealthy person than a poor one. Not always, but that a lot of times is the case. And sometimes maybe maybe there's somebody we know that's a poor person. They're our neighbor or somebody that we come across on a regular basis. And think about that compared to a very wealthy person. We tend to avoid one if we can help it. Well, they may ask me for something. And we tend to crave the attention of the other. And nowhere is that truer than in our country, this obsession that people have with extremely wealthy people. And just a chance to even be looked at by them, spoken to by them. And it's just a sad reality. Sometimes that's the way it is. Alden, in his little commentary, makes this observation. I'm paraphrasing, but he says something to the effect of beware if people are seeking your attention if you do have some wealth. Beware of that from the standpoint of somebody trying to crave attention simply because you have some wealth. But also beware of that from the standpoint of, as he puts it, I think he posed it, as I recall in his little commentary, as a question. Am I buying my friends? And I will say that, we might be thinking to ourselves, that doesn't really apply to me. I mean, I'm not certainly not a wealthy person. But somebody, might have been Bob, pointed out last week, wealth is a relative term, a very much relative term. And to, 95% of the world, just by virtue of the fact that we're living in this country, we are quite wealthy. So beware of that, though. Beware of that from the standpoint, I don't want to be, somebody might think, well, I'm really a popular person. Well, is it because you're friendly and you're making friends with people, or is it because I'm buying that wealth? Or then again, somebody might be tempted to think, well, everybody's, watch out for people that might try to take advantage of you. But again, unless we think, well, that doesn't apply to me, I'm not, one of these elite wealthy people. You live in America compared to just about at least the vast majority of the world, the rest of the world. Yes, you are. You're extremely wealthy. All right. 14. Sorry, I didn't move that to verse 20 when it came back up. 14:24. Oh, okay. I was trying to figure out what happened there. I moved my notes around. I got to fix that. Okay. I knew that was not right, and I had changed something, and it was just confusing me. Okay, 14:24. The crown of the wise is their riches, but the foolishness of fools is folly. Again, I mentioned Alden earlier in his commentary. He makes the point here that it can be a little bit ambiguous because of the three different words right there, almost back to back to back in the second phrase. The folly of fools brings folly. Say that 3 times fast, right? It's almost like a tongue twister. The folly of fools brings folly. The illustration here, though, is that wealth is like a crown, a reward for wisdom. Fools, by contrast, they wear their stupid, foolish behavior, as it were, like a crown of shame. Paul says, henceforth there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me at that day. Well, there could be a crown of righteousness, but there could also be a crown of shame. Do you remember, am I thinking of the right thing? Didn't they used to have like a pointy hat that you would wear? It was like a dunce hat. That's it. I was trying to think of that. But that's kind of like the fool's crown, right? You got a dunce hat on or something. You advertise to the world, I'm a dummy. I'm an idiot. I make really foolish, stupid decisions. And that's kind of the idea with the dunce hat. And here, it's not a physical, literal crown, obviously, but it's it's kind of like we might say, just hang around a fellow for a little bit. Hang around him for a little bit, and you'll know he'll wear that foolishness because he's going to say foolish things. He's going to do foolish things. And sometimes it shows up even as scars and, injuries because of foolish behavior, especially when it comes to drinking alcohol and things like that. So, foolishness of fools is folly. I put a note here in my notes that the idea seems to be akin to Jesus' statement of Matthew 7:20, wherefore by their fruits, what? You shall know them. You can a lot of times look at the fruit of a person's life, actions, speech, and see, is this a wise person or is this a foolish person? They wear that like, as it were, some type of garment, crown, headgear, whatever you want to put that. All right, anything else on that one? Let's go to 15, Proverbs 15, verse 6. I don't know why our internet's so squirrely tonight, but it is. 15:6. In the house of the righteous is much treasure, but in the revenues of the wicked is trouble. And you see the ESV rendering of it there. In the house of the righteous there is much treasure, but trouble befalls the income of the wicked. A wise, righteous person is going to tend to be a diligent investor. They're going to have financial difficulties like anybody else, but the financial difficulty is not going to ruin him because he's diligent and wise in his investments. Maybe he's carefully distributed his money, assets, distributed it around. We might say doesn't have all his eggs in one basket. And so the daily economic fluctuations or declines and things like that, they're it's not like it's to say it has no effect, but it's not disastrous like it might otherwise be. A foolish, wicked person, though, is the one who we might say he does have all his eggs in one basket. Sometimes he's spending the money before it's even made. Alden, I mentioned his commentary earlier, he says perhaps this means that it's an indication of how God has a way, a means of leveling things out, as he puts it. The wicked losing his wealth due to maybe a sudden crisis, health problems, things like that. And to that point, I would just say maybe. Again, Proverbs deals in generalizations, so it could possibly be the case that that's kind of what he's talking about, but I don't know. I'm not sure if that's the most likely thing. I put in my notes it might be figurative. Much treasure may be referring to beyond money. In the house of the righteous, there's much treasure. Well, he's got blessings that transcend physical, financial wealth. And for the wicked, well, he might have income of the wicked, but sometimes more money means more trouble, more problems. And so maybe it's not always what it seems to be so wealthy. Let's put a peg there and pick up, God willing, next week. What is next week? 18th, right? Is that right? So we'll pick up there, Lord willing, next week and carry on with this subsection of general, and then should get into our next subsection, I think, next week or the week after. Thank y'all very much.